Whoa, folks, we're back on the last episode in the Reef. I promised you that Nick Nollenberger, the voice of the San Jose Barracuda, would be on the show, and I did not lie. I may have lied the last time Nick was on the show when I said, we'll see you after the holidays, but I never specified which year's holidays that we'd have Nick back on. So fast forward a year, Nick, welcome back in the Reef. I heard you had quite the adventure as you embarked over from Tucson to Cedar Park, Texas. So I'm glad that you're safe and frosty. I realize I'm wearing a sweatshirt with like 50-degree weather, a little more frigid where you're at. But how you doing, Nick?
I am doing good. I'm happy to be safely and securely in my hotel room. Yeah, a little bit different weather than what we were dealing with in Arizona. It's been in the low 80s in Arizona. It's been perfect. And now we are out here in Austin, just outside of Austin in Cedar Park. And it is cold. It is frozen. The roads are frozen. We just made our way back from the airport to the hotel. And it was about a 20-minute drive. And no word of a lie, probably the scariest bus trip I've ever taken in my life. So it was terrifying. We got on a big overpass that crossed a freeway, and it was about, I would say, a couple hundred feet off the ground at least. And we had a box truck in front of us that was completely sideways, and it was inching along, just trying to get traction enough to get up and over this overpass. Again, I mean, 200 might be an understatement on how high we were. And we are in a bus, and we are slipping and sliding, trying to inch along. So we did get over that was terrifying. And then we're kind of humming along. We're about 2 miles away from the hotel, and all of a sudden, in the distance, we see some cop sirens and flashing lights. And so our bus driver was probably going a little bit too fast. You could hear all the players in the back saying, "Hey, slow down, slow down." And she starts trying to slow down, and all of a sudden we're going sideways. So luckily she was able to tap the brakes enough, and we were able to slow down. And then from that point, I think we had an average speed of about 5 miles per hour for the next mile. So everybody got off the bus, praying and pointing up to the skies, and just appreciative to be off the bus and safe. So just adventure to get out here to Texas, to say the least. But happy to be here, excited for the games this upcoming weekend, and we are expected to have weather all weekend. So the bus driver said it could get as low as like 2 or 3 degrees. So they're not kidding around down here in Texas. So
yeah,
a little bit surprising.
Go figure. First off, isn't it funny that a bus full of hockey players, ice hockey players, who are, this game is really based on speed these days, and ice hockey players telling people to slow down. It's a little too fast. That's ironic. Yes. I have a cousin actually out in Texas right now, and she sent me a screenshot last night of she's in Dallas, and it was 2 degrees. So I definitely believe that it's a little frosty for you. But I might as well ask here, because Nick, the last time we really talked about travel with coronavirus and everything, it looked like you were going to be broadcasting the games from the arena in a similar setup to what the Sharks broadcast team with Randy Hahn and Brett Hedican have. But it's pretty cool to see that you're on the road, but I assume that you're in the same kind of restrictions that the players are, where you're kept to the hotel. How is that all going?
Yeah, we're getting tested every single day. Everybody has their own hotel rooms. We have multiple buses. Normally we have just one bus. We have multiple buses that allows for everybody to have some distance in between each other. They have gone above and beyond to try to keep everybody as safe as possible. It's been pretty impressive since I've been with the team over the last couple of weeks, just to see how extensive they've gone and how in depth they've gone to try to make sure everybody's safe and try to get, this season off the ground and try to play as many games as possible. Clearly, there was an emphasis by the organization, by the league, to play this season. To have 31 teams and only have 3 of them not playing, I think, is extremely impressive. And it also, I think, gives you an idea on how important these NHL teams view the American League, how important they view development of their prospects. We have a couple of young guys, and I know you sent me some questions leading into this on what you wanted to talk about, and we will in just a bit touch on some of the young guys. But you know, in a normal season, a lot of these players would be going back to college or major junior. And with just one of the three CHL leagues playing right now, we're seeing some of these young players drafted in the last draft 2 months ago getting pro games, which is fabulous from our standpoint, getting to see them firsthand. But we have a lot of players right now. We have 32 players on our roster right now before the recalls this afternoon. So we have quite a few. That's a lot more. It's almost at least 10 more than we're normally rolling with. So if you'd imagine, a lot of guys are sitting out. So to be together, to get valuable ice time, to get valuable practice time, for guys to stay after on the ice and get extra reps and work with the coaching staff. Doug Wilson Jr., who's our scouting director, has been on the road with us. Tim Burke, who's the assistant GM, has been on the road with us, working with these guys on a day-to-day basis. So there's a lot of work getting done. You know, the games are just a small piece of it right now in terms of a development standpoint, but it's been pretty impressive to see how much of a commitment they've made to try to make sure everybody is safe and make sure everybody is healthy. And, you know, we did have the one game canceled, as everybody is aware of, but I think that was more of a precaution than anything. And we've got a couple games under our belt. And at this point, weather permitting, we are off and running. So I'm excited, extremely exciting to get back into the booth, be able to talk a little bit of hockey, seeing these guys in the flesh, and just get some normalcy back in our lives. I know everybody's gone through it, and we hope everybody's staying safe and doing okay. But just to get a little bit of normalcy, I think is just good for your mental health too. So been here for a couple of weeks, and it's been a lot of fun so far, and I'm excited to just continue to roll along with what's going to be a sprint from what we are accustomed to in terms of a season and its length. We'll play just 39 games over about a 4-month span. So I was just saying to my dad the other day, we'll get done with this road trip. 8 games will be under our belt, and that's a quarter of the season. So it's pretty remarkable to look at it that way.
That's actually a really interesting way of looking at it that way, because obviously there was the one game that was canceled, but that is still a huge chunk of games being played before you ever even get to San Jose. And I actually wanted to ask you if you heard anything as to why that one game was canceled, because I did notice that Tucson, I was wondering if it was like a travel restriction situation with Tucson, because they only have the 3 games in San Jose, which aren't even in San Jose, actually. They were the first 3 games that were in Tucson. They don't actually travel to Northern California at all now that Stockton is gone. So I was wondering if the decision was made to cancel it so that Tucson didn't have to come to San Jose later on in the year, perhaps, or if you have any insight as to why canceled versus postponed when there are gaps in the schedule that they could have rescheduled.
I think this year, because the thought process by the league just in general is to try to finish this season. You know, we don't even really know what's going to happen in terms of a playoff format. So, you know, there's teams that are playing a different amount of games. And we're playing Texas this weekend, a team that normally plays the full American Hockey League schedule. And they're expected to play just 38 games. So I don't think playing 40 for the Barracuda was necessarily, you know, the end goal. That, you know, I think there was some thought that something like this could happen. And if it did happen, everybody had to be adaptable and flexible with what transpired. You know, you're playing a team 3 times over, 4 or 5 day period. You know, in a normal season, I think you would look to try to reschedule. This year, it's just, you know, to try to, you know, caution on the side of safety. I think the thought process, and again, I don't have a ton of, you know, inside knowledge on why the decision was made, but, you know, from my perspective, I think it was, let's cancel the game on Friday. Let's reschedule the game on Saturday to Sunday, so it gives us a couple more days. We'll continue to test these guys, make sure everybody's healthy, make sure that we don't have any sort of, you know, spread of this with the positive test that occurred the Saturday prior. So it gives you a full 8 days between games. And then let's start the season and let's try to forge forward and power forward. If you try to play games or you try to cram things in and then all of a sudden you have some sort of COVID issue where you've got 4 or 5 players, even more testing positive, then you're in, you know, a world of hurt, and you may not even be playing 39 games. So could it happen again this season? Certainly. I think everybody's just got to be adaptable and flexible and, you know, just go with the flow is kind of going to be the narrative throughout the season, I think, for everybody in the league.
Well, it's definitely a game of adaptability at this point. I mean, it started even in the preseason because, and I'm going to get to this after we recap the first couple of games, but this roster has already seen quite a lot of turnover just from the start of the preseason to the end of the preseason to the postponement and cancellation of a game, preseason game, to then the cancellation of the regular season opener. The last episode of In the Reef turned into an hour-long episode, and I'm like, this is only the preseason. Like, oh my goodness, there's so much news coming out of the AHL, and we're less than a week in. So, but I do want to recap the first couple of games with you, Nick, and get your thoughts on what you saw, because I was listening to CUDA Confidential. That came out on Tuesday. That's, of course, Nick's podcast. Definitely want to check that out on sjbarracuda.com. But it almost seemed like we don't know what to make of this team so far after seeing two completely different games. But those two games were Saturday and Monday against Tucson. The first one was an overtime loss, 2-1. I thought it was pretty fun hockey for the first two periods. Scoreless hockey, but for the most part. But Joachim Blichfeld, towards the end of the second period, had a pretty bad turnover in his own end, for those of you who didn't watch that game. It resulted in a 2-on-1, and Tyler Steenbergen one-timed a goal there late in the second to make it 1-0. John Leonard in the third period, a player I really want to touch up with you on. He was one of the players reassigned at the end of the AHL preseason. He was up the left side on a partial 3-on-1. He got that tying goal. But then, unfortunately, in overtime, a bad bounce over Ryan Merkley's stick allowed Cam Dineen to skate in and score the OT winner. But on a positive, that brought the Barracuda unbeaten in regulation streak to 7 consecutive games dating back to February 26th of last year. So the Barracuda almost went a full year without losing in regulation. So that's pretty cool. Did you have any thoughts about the first game before I get to the second one, or do you want to just kind of mesh it all together here?
Yeah, whatever you want. I mean, I'll touch quickly on the first game. With such a long break, the team did play almost six preseason games. We were supposed to play 7. We didn't get through the 6th one, so we canceled the 7th. But those were some really valuable games right, with as many players as we alluded to on the roster. So it felt like, you went into that game with the thought, are we going to see, a really sloppy brand of hockey? We're going to see a lot of turnovers. Are we going to see a lot of defensive breakdowns, structural, inefficiencies? Are some of these young guys going to kind of look out of place, like they don't know what they're doing? And I was actually pretty impressed on how competitive it was. You had your turnovers, you had your odd man rushes. Ozzy Wiesblatt had a breakaway chance in that first. Kevin Watt had a breakaway chance for Tucson in that first. You saw some good grade A chances really on both sides. Overall, though, it was extremely entertaining. It was high pace. I thought it was pretty high quality hockey. Both teams very skilled offensively. You look at Tucson's roster. This is a team that, when the season came to a halt last year, was in first place, and they have a lot of returners from that team, both at the forward spot and on the defense. And then they've got a goaltender in Ivan Prosvetov, who got some really good reps last year, kind of splitting time with Aiden Hill, who's now up with the Coyotes on their practice squad. So this is a proven guy at the American League level that he can, get wins and he can produce. So I think Tucson's going to be one of the best teams in the division when everything is said and done. They've got so many returning pieces, a team that's won 2 of 3 Pacific Division titles. Tip your cap to what the Coyotes have done from a prospect standpoint. They've been able to develop players in Tucson since they brought that team from Springfield a handful of years ago. So they have a nice product there. They've got a nice little system going, and I think it's going to be a very good team. So obviously you would have liked to come out of there with at least one win, especially being that they are considered home games. But, this is as good of a test, as good of a test as you're going to have going into an opening weekend with a team like Tucson that, again, has a lot of pieces that were returning. So I spoke to our assistant coach, Michael Chason, following game number 2. And, he used the word helter-skelter. And I think that's going to happen throughout the year with these young players. You mentioned Merkley having the puck skip over his stick, goes down for a game winner. Joachim Blichfeld a turnover. These things are going to happen. right? You've got some older players who are in year 3, like a Hulk Gawaks, a True, on the blue line, you got D. Simone. These are veteran guys. You don't expect to make a lot of mistakes. But, a guy even like Blickfeld, 1 pro year under his belt, a little bit of taste of the NHL level, but then you take almost 11 full months off. So you've got to expect there's going to be some mental lapse. There's going to be, some, whether it's, I don't know if conditioning is going to be an issue, but you would imagine just pace and timing, all that stuff's going to be a factor. And, when everything was said and done after game 1, I was actually, I felt like I came away pretty impressed and excited what this team could do. You only saw 1 power play chance, but on that 1-man advantage, they were zipping the puck around. They could roll too deep on that power play with all the skill they have. So you get the point in game number 1, and then you go into game number 2, and it kind of a seesaw game, a game that gets away from you a little bit in the second period. You find yourself in some penalty trouble. And you're just, you're toting that line of risk when you start taking too many penalties, even though the PK looked pretty good in the first, game in a period, right? And all of a sudden you're getting to your 4th or 5th penalty and you allow one to get in, and then you're down by 2. And, that was kind of the game after 40 minutes. You do get one back, but the momentum was certainly in favor of Tucson going into that 3rd period. So, an interesting weekend. As I mentioned to Brian Tosti during the podcast, I caught up with the voice of the Texas Stars, and I said, I think I'm a little bit more confused after a weekend than I was going into it, but certainly confused, but also intrigued because I think it's a pretty skilled group. It just has a lot of youth, and youth often equals, some mistakes from time to time.
Sure, definitely. And that interview or conversation, I'd really put it, with Brian Tosti was exactly where I was going with that, where you said, I almost feel more confused about this team, but it's intriguing. And that I felt the same way, because especially the second game, I'm going to recap this real quick, but the second game was very bizarre, because I thought the first 16 minutes were just, it was fine, and then bang, 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 like 4 goals, 2 apiece for each team in under 3 minutes. Joachim Blickfeld, atones for that turnover in game 1 with a nice shot in game 2, the first period, to make it 1-0. Tucson gets 2 quick ones. Alex True comes right back, knocks down Brinson Pashnuk's bomb from the blue line, 2-2 going into the second. But then Tucson right away started the second, gets a goal. Barracuda killer Michael Bunting gets another one at the end of the period. And even though the Barracuda outshot the Roadrunners 15-8, in that period, it didn't really feel like we really had any control of that period. And then the third period, as you mentioned, Alex True got his second goal back, and then the Barracuda gave one up late. It was a 5-3 loss. So it was interesting. It was fun to watch, just to have AHL hockey back. Of course, that's anyone who's watching this show obviously loves the AHL, because you're going to have your diehard fans. So even though it was the first regulation loss in almost a year, I think we can come away happy that hockey's back, and look forward to a good series here with Texas. What I want to ask you about primarily here, after the 2 games, after the preseason, everything like that. Today we saw John Leonard, Jake Middleton, and Alexei Melnichuk get recalled by the Sharks. That comes off of 9 players being reassigned from the Sharks a week ago, or a little over a week ago. Can this team gel when this roster is in constant shuffle? And I really think that more than maybe any team in the AHL, the NHL AHL, I think the Sharks are going to utilize their taxi squad and assigning from the taxi squad to the AHL more than anyone else. So do you think this team can find enough consistency? Because we saw John Leonard play 2 good games and he immediately gets called up right off the bat. Can we see some consistency to which the Barracuda can be considered a playoff team?
It's going to be interesting, right? Because this taxi squad kind of throws a wrench in the AHL product, because, you've got those fringe guys every single year that are going to get call-ups and then be down in the American Hockey League, but they're going up and down constantly. Well, this year, now you've got these tweeners, right? And I think the organization all season long is going to call people up to the taxi squad and send people down. I think they want to reward guys for their hard work, for their commitment. At the same time, they want guys to get games. So that's why you saw Melnichuk, Pasechnik, Leonard starting, of course, with the Sharks, but Pasechnik and Melnichuk come to mind as two guys who are on the practice squad. Then all of a sudden, when the Barracuda start playing games, they're down. You allow for Melnichuk to get a couple games. He had still, before joining the Barracuda, he had to get in a game with the Sharks, meaning he had never played a game in North America.
Right.
So, we're going to see that all season long. I think there's a lot of value for these young players to be around the NHL guys. That being said, I don't believe they're even skating with them. It's almost like a separate deal. But there's going to be value just being around them, seeing that product firsthand. For a guy like a Nicholas Milosh, who has been in the American League his first couple of years, hadn't gotten an opportunity at the NHL level, gets one this year, had a great training camp and earned that spot. But I think he's going to be one of those guys that we may see him in the AHL, but we'll mostly see him on the taxi squad. But eventually, you're sitting on that taxi squad, you don't get games for a while. You'd expect to see him down in the American League, get some games, get some timing, and then maybe go back up to the taxi squad. So, games are so valuable, but I think there is some value with the taxi squad as well, being that you are immersed, in that NHL culture. It's a little bit of a different beast in the American Hockey League, just on how things are run and the hotels and the cities. All these things can become a little bit more normal, I think, for some of these guys who maybe wouldn't be in the NHL this year. So John Leonard, great opening weekend in the American Hockey League. Not surprised he's back up in the NHL. And he'll be in the lineup tonight for the Sharks, it sounds like. So a guy who the organization is extremely high on, as someone who led NCAA hockey with 27 goals last year. So would not be surprised if he goes up and down throughout the year, or maybe just sticks, right? Or just sticks at the NHL level. But, in his first taste at the NHL level, gets the 2 assists in his debut, and then he goes pointless over the next 6 games. And I think that's going to be a kind of a normal thing for a young player as he gets used to the speed and physicality of the NHL game. But that's why the American League is so valuable, because he's able to kind of regain confidence at the AHL level and then go back up. And we'll see if it pays dividends tonight.
Right, I agree. And with John Leonard, I mentioned this on After Dark earlier in the week or last weekend, whenever it was. These coronavirus days all blend together sometimes. But you look at John Leonard, and he was a goal scorer. That's what he did in college hockey. So to come in straight into the NHL and not score goals for 7 games must feel a little bit weird for him. So I liked that the Sharks moved him back down to the Barracuda to get, a little more accustomed to the pro game at a slower but still fast pace. He gets that goal in game 1. That's that's exactly what he needed. I'm a little surprised that the Sharks brought him back so quickly, but they obviously like what they've seen from him. It was just a matter, I think, of building a little more confidence in him. So we'll see how he does with the Sharks. But I agree with you. I think he's going to platoon a lot. And with this taxi squad, it almost feels like the taxi squad has a taxi squad, just because they're going all over the place, kind of like your bus ride on the ice. You're just sliding all over the place, and we'll see which roster is loaded on which day, kind of thing. With the 3 games in Texas coming up, do you think the roster will pretty much be set here? Do you anticipate any more moves? Especially with the injury to Devin Dubnyk. Now Alexei Melnichuk is called up. Luckily, the Barracuda were carrying 3 goalies, as most AHL teams seem to be, with Zach Sawchenko and Sam Harvey. Who do you think is going to get the start here, or at least a couple of starts?
That's a good question. I would imagine it's going to be Sawchenko. I thought he had a pretty solid year last year for his first year in the American Hockey League. So I would expect Zach to get the start on Friday, and then being that it's 3 games over a 5-day span, certainly we could see Sam Harvey, and I'm excited about this young player.
Yeah.
A guy who had to go to Canadian college hockey, didn't get much of a look from the pros, despite having just a stellar junior career.
Yeah.
And the reason really being, I think, is his size or lack thereof. A smaller guy, but this organization is not scared of smaller goaltenders.
We saw that with Sawchenko last year, and I thought he played very well.
And you know what? There's some parallels between the two because Sawchenko had to go play, Canadian college hockey as well before earning himself a professional contract. So, I'm excited to see Harvey because he played a little bit in the preseason. I think he got at least one game and picked up a win. So he has a great connection with Danny Sabbert, who's the goaltending coach with the Barracuda this year, having spent several years together in Rouyn-Noranda in the Quebec League. So I would imagine it would be, Sazi will get the start on Friday, and then maybe you give Harvey the start on Saturday and go back to Sawchenko on Tuesday. But I guess that's to be determined. If you win, you decide to go with a guy again back to back. But we shall see. But yes, it just increases the importance of having 3 goaltenders this year because there's not going to be any East Coast League call-ups this year. Right. So you've got to have extras. That's the reason why we have so many players in the roster. That's the reason why we have 3 goalies. So, it is a unique year to say the least, but it's already paying dividends to have a little bit of extra depth and, have guys ready to go because things can change as we're seeing with Dubnyk in a hurry.
Right. And right now with extra players, because there are no junior leagues being playing, there's a lot of eyes on Ozzy Wiesblatt, Tristen Robbins, Brandon Coe from this last draft class, and Dylan Hamiluk from the 2019 draft class. Now, Hamiluk and Coe didn't play in either of those games, but you wonder if being bigger bodies against the Texas forwards, who it's been a while since I've looked at Texas's roster, but I kind of remember them being a bigger team up front. Do you think it's going to be kind of a rotation with these young kids while they're still on the AHL roster? Or do you think Robbins and Wiesblatt will get the bulk of the time like what we saw with the first 2 games? I'm curious to see what the temperature is of the rookie deployment, because it is a unique situation having these players under 20 in the middle of the season, or in this case, the beginning of the season instead of the end of the year, coming in, hopefully making an impact. I thought Wiesblatt looked very good in that first game and looked pretty good in the second game, but I want him to shoot more. I'm a true Sharks fan because I want him to shoot more, I guess. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts about these rookies and what you think their deployment is going to be throughout this, forever, the duration of their time with the Barracuda.
Yeah, just touching on a couple of guys that you mentioned too, in the bigger boys, in Coe and Hamiluk. I'm excited to see Hamiluk because he's a guy who was drafted 2 years ago. He has dealt with some injury in his junior career. I believe the year the Sharks drafted him, he was coming off a major injury. So has the physical tools certainly to excel. Another one of those kind of tall, I would say, dangly players that really needs to fill out his body before he's going to play at the pro level.
We haven't seen that before, Max Lechunov.
Yeah, Max, a great example. And I think Dylan could play in the AHL this season technically, but I think it would have been a year that they would have elected to send him back. Now, they could still do that if the WHL ends up getting off the ground, but right now that season has not started, and that's the reason why he's with us. So didn't get in either game this past weekend, so I would be shocked if we didn't see him at some point over the next handful of days. So again, a bigger body. It would be nice to see him get out there. I know he had a really strong start to his season last year in Kelowna and then kind of tapered off a little. So, there's with a young player like that, you just want to, you want to ease him into it a little bit, I think. So, with Coe, he's been dealing with a little bit of an upper body injury, and I think that's why we didn't see him in either game.
Okay.
And then with Wiesblatt and Robbins, 2 young kids who came in on Sunday and brought a ton of energy on that line, along with Jeff Viel. They were mixing it up after almost every single whistle. And these are 2 smaller guys, to be honest. I think they're both listed about 5'11". They're about $180, but they have no fear of getting in the mix. And I mentioned it during the broadcast, but one of the words I took away from Doug Wilson Jr.'s press conference following the NHL draft was him describing Ozzy Wiesblatt as new age toughness. Yeah. And I think what he means by that is a guy who, can fly, has all the offensive skill in the world, but certainly is willing to get in there and get his hands dirty. So Robbins has a proven track record that as well. It's one thing to do that at the junior level when you're going against kids 15 to 20 years old. It's another when you're going against pros, but that didn't seem to deter either player. It also is nice when you have a little bit of muscle on that line as well. And Jeff VL, who's held his own in the last couple seasons at the AHL level. So it was a really nice, fun blend, I thought, of skill and toughness and agitators and guys willing to bang bodies and get in the forecheck and do everything you have to do. So for Wiesblatt, you probably heard on the broadcast, if you had a chance to listen or watch, I was kind of alluding to the same thing. He had a break where we had the puck roll on him a little bit, didn't get a great shot off, and then he had a 2-on-1 where he elected to kind of slide it over on a late pass.
That's the one.
And it was a little bit off target, and I can't recall exactly who was trying to get it over to. It may have been Robbins, but he kind of put it down at his feet, and it was just such a late pass that I think it caught him off guard. And it's one of those things where it's like, from a fan standpoint, it's like, shoot, right? From a broadcast
I try not to be that guy, but
right?
in that moment, and Jaycob Megna had one in the first game too, that I went, Yeah. I know those mistakes or decisions will happen when you're adapting to a pro game.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it's a young player trying to defer, right? Being that they're just getting their feet wet at this level, that, they're thinking of pass first before shoot. And I think it'll come with time. He may shoot the next time he's on a 2-on-1, who knows? But certainly some intriguing pieces there. And, you can see why the organization liked him where they got him late in the first. And then with Robbins, a similar game, a guy who didn't have a huge year his first year in the WHL, but he just absolutely took off last year as the #1 center in Saskatoon. So another exciting player. And it was fun to see them on a line together and two guys we wouldn't get a chance to see in a normal season. So I think if they continue to play the way they do and continue to stick to what makes them successful, they'll start producing a little bit of offense too to go along with it, because they certainly had some chances. It just it didn't quite materialize to the point of them getting the puck into the back of the net.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool having Wiesblatt and Robbins on the same line together, because I remember at the draft, Doug Wilson Jr. had mentioned the player who was drafted in between those two, Thomas Bordeleau. He wanted them all to complement each other, hopefully on one line at some point down the line. That was their vision for it. So to see that come to fruition this early in their, I guess you'd say, pro careers now, it's pretty cool. So for those of you who you like listening to the games, obviously can't go to the games this season, but I definitely encourage you to check out AHL TV. It's a great package. It's very affordable. It's only $35 for the team package and $45 for the league package. So I highly recommend that. I definitely have that, Nick. So whenever you always hear from me before a lot of the games saying, hey, what about that? We should wrap this up, but I want to talk with you about the defense too. Real quick, I want to talk about Jaycob, not Jason, that's his brother, Jaycob Megna being named the new captain. I was not surprised in the slightest about it, because he's a proven leader with San Diego and Chicago, but I was surprised that Jake Middleton doesn't have a letter at all, because I thought for sure one of those two players would be the captain. Do you think Middleton is a situation of he's likely to be platooning between the taxi squads that don't give him a letter, versus Megna's on an AHL contract? He's here for good. How do you feel about the captaincy for this year and for alternates too?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head when it comes to Middleton. I don't think it's any sort of dig at the type of leadership that Jake provides for the locker room. He's been a captain at the junior level. He's been assistant with the Barracuda. He's done everything that Roy Sommer could ask from him over his career with the organization. And I think you're exactly right. He's going to be platooning up and down this year. He'll be on the taxi squad. He'll be the seventh lead. He'll play in some games at the NHL level. He's probably going to be up and on the taxi squad more this year than we'll see him at the AHL level. And I think that's the reason behind it. And then with the other alternate captains, Nick DeSimone, I think certainly deserved. Antti Suomela, Jeff VL. Jeff VL was an alternate last year. Nick DeSimone was as well. I think it's a a great thing for Antti Suomela too, being a guy who came over from Europe a handful of years ago and has been up and down, and just kind of, is a great indication on how he has evolved, not only as a player within the organization, but also just as a man, and maturing and taking that leadership role, I think is extremely valuable for his career. But as far as Megna goes, he's been a captain in the American Hockey League before. He has a great connection with the organization. He was coached by John Hall, who is a scout for the Sharks when he was playing youth hockey in the Chicago area, had a connection with the organization there. He was an assistant captain last year with the Chicago Wolves in the AHL under Rocky Thompson, who's now an associate coach for the Sharks. So, there were people to vouch for him just to get into the organization and sign the deal in November. So they knew the type of character he had and what he was all about. And I think from day one of training camp, he was in the locker room and he was not scared to speak his mind and provide guidance. And, where he felt like maybe some young guys were swaying one direction or the other, he had no problem putting them in line. And I think the coaches recognize that, just, the way he carries himself and represents the organization. I think it was a perfect fit. Again, quickly to go back to Jake Middleton, certainly I think Jake could be a captain in the AHL. But at this point in his career, on a two-way contract, being up and down, that's the only conclusion I can come to. I was not in the room with the coaches when they made that decision.
Sure.
But to me, that's got to be the only logical explanation of why he does not have a letter this year.
Right. That makes sense. And a fun fact about Jake Middleton's brother, Keaton Middleton, who is now with the Colorado Eagles. Colorado has given Keaton Middleton number 67, which was Jake's former number with the Barracuda and the Sharks. So take that for what you will. Colorado is not in the Pacific Division. Well, they're in the Pacific Division, but the Barracuda don't play them this year. Another travel situation, restriction situation, you think?
I basically that's what it is from what I was told. We're playing Texas instead of Colorado, okay. And I think Texas needed they needed more opponents. They needed more diversity in their schedule this year with no San Antonio now in the mix, being that they were purchased by Las Vegas and moved out there. So, they needed more teams to play, and no Milwaukee this year in the Central Division, so that eliminates an option for them. So I think, when they were trying to fill out their schedule, they asked, and we were up for it. And from our standpoint, it's kind of fun to go outside of the division. We haven't played Texas in a couple of years, a former Pacific Division foe. So a great building to travel to, and should be a fun weekend. And it'll be 6 games over the season, so it'll be fun to kickstart it on Friday night.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned I wanted to talk about more defensemen. I'm going to cut this for a future episode, so make sure that everyone subscribes if you haven't already to Tealtown USA. So I'm just going to say, Nick DeSimone, keep doing what you're doing, because I thought Nick DeSimone was great those first 2 games. A player I thought that has kind of trended downward over the last couple of years, but I really liked Nick DeSimone's game, and he looked like a player who's out to prove himself and say, hey, I want to be on that taxi squad if I'm not on the Sharks. So, but I'd like to talk with you about Nick on the next time we're on together here, Nick.
Let's do it.
So what I want to ask you here, because I want to get your prognostications about the season before we go home. Is there an unsung hero to be noted on this roster? Maybe like a Joe Gareffa, definitely the smallest player on this team, but a player who scored goals with Marco Rossi last year. Like, is there someone on the roster that you look at and say, he might surprise some people?
I may have to get back to you on that, because I've only seen a couple of games, but I think Gareffa would be certainly a candidate. I know Roy Sommer's high on him. He is a small player, to say the least, but he is
Jaden Halbgewachs towers over Joe Gareffa.
I looked in the ice and I said, who is that? I didn't know who it was. First of all, I was still getting a little bit used to the roster, but when I saw him the first day of practice, I said, who is that? He looked, he's just not a very big guy, but give him credit, because he was able to carve out a fabulous career in the OHL, and he got into a into an AHL training camp last year with Ontario, and he lit up the ECHL in a short stint. Went down with the Allen Americans to start the year because of the delayed start to the AHL season. So he's got one game under his belt. I think certainly a guy who can fill the back of the net. If you put him in the right spot with the right line mates and he starts getting some confidence, certainly I think he'd be a good choice. What makes me so excited about this season, and I know we got to go here, but just the depth at the forward position and the youth. We talk about a little bit more of a veteran blue line, which makes you feel good too, because this has been such a young team over the last handful of years. But at the forward position, it's really all about youth. You've got Alexander True down right now, a couple goals his last game. I would expect him to be up at some point. Latunov has been down, he's been up. He's up right now. So there's kind of those fringe guys that have a little bit more experience, but the young guys, extremely intriguing and very talented. And if they start getting a little confidence, they get comfortable to the American League game quickly, then I think this team has a chance to be pretty darn good.
For sure. So I want to ask you where you think this team might finish. I know it's the hot seat question, but where they might finish in the division. Now, I'm going to go first so that I can look like the bad guy to start and take all the heat. And then maybe you can agree with me if you'd like, or you can bring the crowd up. But for me, I think the Barracuda are going to be finishing somewhere around 5th or 6th in the division, not because the Barracuda are a bad team. I actually think the Barracuda are going to be a lot stronger than they were last season. But I look at teams like San Diego. Oh, I really hope Trevor Zegras gets called up before we play them in March. But San Diego is looking really good. I think Henderson is going to be a good team. I know that I've debated with some people about that, but I feel Henderson's going to be a strong team. Ontario has upside. I think Tucson has, I don't think they're the best team on paper, but I think they're a very cohesive unit, as we saw in those first 2 games. So then you're looking at Bakersfield, who don't have to worry too much about call-ups or send-downs because the Oilers pretty much can't, given they're across the border. So I think you're looking at like a 5th, 6th situation. Please tell me, Nick, are you more optimistic, though?
It's going to be extremely interesting in the sense that you've already played 2 games and, you've yet to pick up a win. It's going to be a 39-game schedule at this point. So if you don't turn the ship in the right direction, I think this weekend, then you're in a world of hurt. And if you win one of the 3 games this weekend, then all of a sudden, you're 1-4 to start the season.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of your season when you're playing just 39 games. So I think this is a very, very important weekend when it comes to, this team being in that top echelon in the division. You mentioned San Diego, extremely talented, tons of top picks on that team. Zegras has been lighting up the AHL so far to start. They've got good goaltending. They've got veterans on that lineup as well. So San Diego is going to be a very hard out, as they often are. Henderson, I think, from the small sample size we saw with Henderson, I think they're going to be a fringe team. I think they're around that 4 or 5 mark. Okay. That being said, you get off to a strong start. Who knows? But they've got guys like Danny O'Regan who have proven at the AHL level that they can score. But I think there's some holes in that lineup as well. But again, these things are very to be determined. Bakersfield, kind of, one of those transitional teams. They still got a lot of guys left over from that really good team they had 2 years ago. Joe Gambardella comes to mind as a guy who was really good that season. Tyler Benson, the second rounder of the Oilers a couple years ago, is still, when the season started, he was down on that roster. I don't know if he still is or he'll be a taxi squad guy this year, but there's still some pieces with Bakersfield. Bakersfield may be one of those teams that's on the outside looking in. I think Tucson's going to be very good. I think we saw a good example of what they'll be. They're going to be able to score. They've got, a couple of their top pieces back. So Ontario, I think Ontario is probably going to be on the outside looking in this year. They've got a lot of young, high draft picks, the Kings, picking where they have in the draft over these last handful of years. But, with the LA Kings roster, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up, having a lot of these guys get games this year at the NHL level. Yeah. Just because they can, if they're not in the playoff mix. So, again, a little bit premature, I think, to decide, but I don't think you're way off. I think they're going to be around that 3 to maybe, 5 range. So if you're 3, you're good. You're 4, you're good. You're 5, you're not. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I think this is a very important weekend. Again, if you don't pick up at least 2 wins, you're kind of in a bad spot behind the 8 ball a little bit in the division.
Definitely agree with you on that. I hadn't actually thought of how important this 3-game set with Texas is. So I'm glad you brought that to light. And you had a really good conversation, as we talked about earlier, with Brian Tosti on CUDA Confidential. So please talk about your podcast for a bit. Definitely promote yourself, please.
Absolutely. Well, as most of you guys are probably aware, with the Sharks 24-hour streaming platform now, the Sharks Audio Network, we are going to have quite a bit of content on that. So I just had a podcast that I released that you can listen on there, and it's on demand too at sjbarracuda.com/confidential. But it's 30-minute podcast with Nick DeSimone, kind of dives into his background. We've got one with John Leonard. We've also got one with Curtis Gabriel. I have interviewed almost everybody on our roster, so hoping to kind of release those as the season continues along, just really behind the green, evergreen type of stuff. And then every single week, we've got a 30-minute podcast. It'll be exactly 30 minutes. Most of the days, it's going to be on Mondays. This week, we released it on a Wednesday just because of scheduling. And that'll kind of determine on when we do release it. But it will be on the Sharks Audio Network. It'll be exactly 30 minutes long. We're hoping to, talk to some of the other teams, whether it's their broadcaster, their head coach, get an idea and a scouting report leading into some of these weekend matchups. And then we'll talk to Roy and we'll talk to Bones, as we did this week, Jimmy Bono, assistant coach, and Michael Chason, what players on there. And then we recap kind of the week that was. So it gives people a nice, cliff notes on what just happened and what's ahead and what to expect and a pulse on the team. So, again, the podcast, CUDA Confidential, should be going out almost every Monday. We'll have another one coming out this Monday. You can listen on the Sharks Audio Network, or you can listen on demand at sjbarracuda.com/listen. So we got a lot of fun stuff coming out. Hopefully it'll give fans an idea about kind of, the next future Sharks, give them a better idea behind the scenes, their upbringing. Nick DeSimone is a great example, a guy who, when he was young, he got cut from multiple teams, never made a team in the USHL, ended up going back home to Buffalo, ended up playing under former Buffalo Sabres captain Michael Pekka. He gets him a Division I scholarship at Union College, and the rest is history. He signed an entry-level contract after his junior season. So he has a really fun, fabulous story, and he's a great guy and, really talkative and articulate. So we've got a lot of fun stuff coming out. So hopefully you guys are able to listen. Hopefully it'll give you kind of a behind the scenes and more knowledge about the Sharks prospects and kind of the future of the Sharks.
Yeah, that Nick DeSimone interview was really good. I listened to that over the weekend, and he's a very personable guy. And I'll say hi to his mom, Cindy, who follows me on Twitter. So, but, on the last episode, I packed a lot in. And after 13 months, I thought it was kind of a runaway freight train episode. So this one was also really packed, but it was nice to be able to converse with you, Nick. It's really, great insight that you bring us, and good to be able to just bounce info back and forth. So I appreciate that. A couple of things real quick, small things here. Has Josef Korenar finally become Josef Korenar? Because I know officially in Czech it's Korenar, but it's never quite translated over to North America. So I'm curious on that.
So I had Randy Hahn text me the other day. He said, "How do you say his last name?" And I said, "I'm going to reach out to him and triple confirm, because we've been calling him Korenar for the last couple of years. Most of the organization says Korenar, so I asked him. He said Korenar. So I still don't know if I'm getting that 100% spot on, but I recorded it and I said it about a dozen times, and I sent it to Randy, and I said, "Randy, you can run with this. Good luck." I had Dan Ruzanowski reach out to me about 3 or 4 days ago, and he was like, "Wait a minute. Randy's telling me this is how you say the name." And I said, "Hey, here you go. Here's the soundbite." And he said Korenar. So when he plays in a game with the Barracuda again this year, we're going to say Korenar, and we will have to inform some of the fans who might be a little bit confused on who's playing in the net, because they're going to be like, "Did we get a new prospect? Did we get somebody new on the roster?" No, it's Josef Korenar. So
Yes.
Not Josef Korenar. So
took
us a couple years to get
Korenar.
right.
It's not Korenar.
It's definitely not Korenar, but yeah. I'm excited to tell other broadcasters in the division who it took them a couple years to get down that I have a new pronunciation for them.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, because everyone on Tealtown USA knows that I'm a stickler for pronunciation and audio. So cool. We got this official confirmation here. I appreciate that. We're going to have a lot more to talk about throughout the season, fans. So be sure to subscribe to us and have the alerts turned on. Our shows here in the Reef, Cuda Confidential is every week. In the Reef is we try to do them every couple of weeks, but it's kind of here or there. So you definitely want to subscribe and set your alerts so that you don't miss the next time that we're on together. Because I love having these shows. They're a lot of fun. I hope they're a lot of fun for you, Nick, and for you, the fans. So until next time, I just want to leave you with this. It's a quote from, me paraphrasing, a quote from Brian McCormick from Cuda Confidential. He's the play-by-play voice of the Henderson Silver Knights. The AHL, it's an opportunity to see the entire evolutionary arc of a player's development, not just from within your own organization, but also within other organizations in your conference that you see all the time. And that is why I love the AHL so much, why I love development leagues, why I go to San Jose Giants games. I just love watching the evolutionary arc of these players. So when we can go back into SAP Center to see these games, and then eventually at Solar for America Ice, I definitely encourage you to do so, because you could say, I saw Ozzy Wiesblatt score 4 goals in a game, maybe. No pressure, Ozzy, at the AHL level. So, but that's why I love the AHL stories like that. So I thought that was a great quote from Brian. But until next time, we'll see you in the Reef.